Hello, my name is Mark Samudre, and I'm an assistant professor of special education at the University of Kentucky. And I'm here to talk to you today about promoting success among educators. Our objective today is to identify feasible ways to collaborate with other educators and support their implementation of function-based supports. Now, here's a rough breakdown of this didactic recording. By the minute. As we progress through these topics, there will be some opportunities to respond. So without further ado, let's get to it. Now, if you turned into our previous echoes, you'll have heard some valuable info on promoting student success with function-based thinking. We're going to begin our time today by approaching function-based thinking from a resource efficiency perspective. First off, function-based thinking is intended to be a time, cost, and resource-efficient approach to supporting students. And from a time perspective, initial investment in training enhances a teacher's ability to consider function at the classroom level, which can offset the time they spend outside of the classroom in behavior support meetings. So in other words, time spent supporting function-based thinking now may lead to less time spent somewhere else. Next, function-based thinking can lead to more efficient support provided to a student. When used as a precursor to a comprehensive functional behavior assessment, preventative interventions can be in place on a more immediate basis, as FBAs may be backlogged. And finally, the logic on intervening earlier being better than later still obviously stands. So to sum it up, function-based thinking can occur in a way that saves time and results in more immediate support for students. But two critical choices facilitate this process: the strategies that we're implementing and the people responsible for implementation or supporting implementation. So this may look familiar. It's included in the vast function-based thinking manual. Now, in this table, we're led to not only select strategies that adults will implement, but also making the plan for implementation. What school members are needed is one question we ask. Who's responsible for what is another. These types of questions and stages of planning exist across many different types of educational programs and decision-making. But applied to function-based supports for students, this is especially important when we have multiple teacher implementers who need to be on the same page to achieve student success and offset more intensive approaches. But this is way easier said than done. Pulling everyone together in a cohesive way seems to be sometimes more time intensive than actually implementing the student support itself. So I'll say it again. Time spent here is less time spent somewhere else. We have to spend it regardless to support our students, so we need to maximize how we do it by pulling everyone together and making sure that we're all on the same page, which is what I hope to dive more into today. If you attended our live echo session online, this was a point in time when we welcome participants to provide their thoughts on what are some necessary facilitators. So feel free to pause the screen, ask yourself, what are some facilitators when it comes to coordinating support for a student across multiple school personnel? What helps this become a feasible and easy task or effective task? So to pull this off, we have to be able to create and implement an accountability and a communication plan. So it's another plan to add to the list. Yes, but this is a mission critical time investment that will work in volume to promote student success. For example, if multiple educators are involved in a single strategy and some are on the same page or some are not, we disrupt potential outcomes for the student that we are supporting versus if everyone were to be on the same page. But to be on the same page looks different across the board. We'll get to talking about that, about what that page might look like in a couple slides. But what I have here are two examples of meetings that can occur to promote accountability and communication. One type of meeting is an informal check-in that can be conducted by an accountability point person that is predetermined. This should not necessarily be the primary implementer. The accountability point person may facilitate asking the items that you see on the left-hand column. Now, these meetings are intended to be brief, but they cannot be standalone touch points across other implementers, meaning they're intended to supplement the formal meeting. Many folks are doing this frequently already, and in a world where it seems like meetings are endless, I encourage you to line meetings when possible to offset this. But some types of things we could do to address during these meetings include the items that you see on the right-hand column. When done together, we have multiple points of contact with implementers that can promote the probability of having a unified approach and strategy. So let's take a look at a scenario and see this in action. Here's an example with Mr. Pump and Mrs. Kin. Mr. Pump is the primary implementer and support, and Mrs. Kin is the accountability partner. So Mr. Pump and Mrs. Kin are working to support a student using function-based thinking to enhance a Tier 2 intervention. Check and check out. Mrs. Kin stops by Mr. Pump's classroom on her way to teach 7th grade math at least once per week to conduct an informal check-in to inquire on the supports and strategies Mr. Pump is implementing to support his student. These informal check-ins usually start and end by the time the next bell rings. Based on their conversation, Mrs. Kin makes quick notes on their discussion. She then brings this up during their next PLC meeting. In other words, the formal meeting, which occurs on a bi-weekly basis. So some things to take note of here. Mrs. Kin is the accountability partner, and Mr. Pump is the primary implementer. An informal meeting can be super brief, such as a pit stop in between class changes. And if educators can commit to doing this just once per week, then we unify our approach and increase the odds that we're unifying approaches. I call this the 2-for-1 deal. For every 2 informal meetings, we'll then have a formal meeting. So if an informal meeting occurs at least once per week, and then we have a formal meeting, that's already 3 times in a single month, okay? Which is already exceeding the recommended dosage for a meeting that you see in your manual. So coming back to the slide, a formal meeting should entail a more summative review of student progress and responsiveness to the strategy that we're implementing. This could look like a whole host of things, similar to what we've talked about in past echo sessions. Graphic display of data, database decision-making, adjustments to the strategy that are conscious of resources. But one major discussion point for making sure everyone's on the same page, and one that I'd like to focus on, is to answer this critical question. Is the intervention being implemented with fidelity? Why is that question so important? For one, these wise words were spoken to me by a mentor and close friend. Changes in student behavior are contingent on some change in teacher behavior. That behavior can include their own implementation, or strategy, or support. Accurate and consistent implementation can drive positive student outcomes. But what can inaccurate or inconsistent implementation do? This decision model is also included in the function-based thinking manual. During the formal meeting, we'll look to determine if the student is responding to that intervention. So if the student were not respond to the intervention, we'd map the 2 possible decisions points. If the intervention was not implemented with fidelity, then we'd plan to provide implementation support. However, if the intervention was implemented with fidelity, then we'd opt to intensify the intervention. But it's wrong to intensify something that was only partially implemented from the start. Again, from a resource perspective, promoting accurate implementation at this stage can offset resources typically needed with the comprehensive functional behavior assessment. So one of our leading questions should always be, if we're seeing non-responsiveness to the support, perhaps take a look at the fidelity data. Is the intervention being implemented consistently and accurately? And if not, then that is a simpler place to start. And so that way we can maximize the support and resource that we're putting forward by making sure all components and plan are being implemented as designed. If you attended our live echo session, we paused here and allowed attendees to respond. thinking a little bit briefly about what current PD opportunities look like, not including this echo series. So we wanted info on length, how they deliver the information, is it across multiple days, is there follow-up, and then asking a question, what could enhance it? So feel free to pause the screen, ask yourself that question before we move further. So the integration of some follow-up support is critical to most implementation efforts designed to improve student outcomes. And as we move forward, we're going to think of this in two ways. Initial refresher trainings for implementation support personnel and how we provide support in a feasible and ongoing manner. What you see on this slide are the mission critical components for training. We'll talk about them individually, but put together, this training package is referred to as Behavioral Skills Training, or BST. BST is an empirically supported training package that has been effective in training teachers, staff, and parents. BST can also be applied by teachers for teachers. So here are the individual training components for BST. The first is instruction, providing a verbal description on the steps required for accurate implementation. Sounds pretty straightforward. Then we move it into an opportunity for you, the accountability person or trainer, to model correct performance, which provides a chance for the person you're training to observe accurate and complete implementation. We then move to providing an opportunity for rehearsal, which gives a chance for the teacher to practice the target skill, followed immediately by feedback given by you, the trainer. This feedback should integrate a positive statement. So for example, a step they implemented correctly, and a corrective feedback statement, or a statement reminding them about steps that were omitted or incorrectly implemented. Let's take a look at the scenario depicting these training points. So back to Mrs. Pump and Mrs. Kim. The scenario reads, a review of treatment fidelity data indicated that incorrect implementation may be a cause of student non-responsiveness to the support. Mrs. Kin sent Mr. Pump an email to coordinate a date and time for a refresher training on implementing the student support. After selecting a date and time, Mrs. Kin provided verbal instruction on all steps related to implementation, followed by modeling correct implementation with Mr. Pump pretending to be the student. Mrs. Kin provided an opportunity for Mr. Pump to rehearse implementation with Mrs. Kin pretending to be the student. Mrs. Kin used a fidelity checklist to score Mr. Pump's implementation during the opportunity for rehearsal. Okay, so notice how Mrs. Kin had a written description of each step present during this refresher training. I recommend providing a copy of this to the adult implementer that you are working with. They can also keep a copy of this during the initial or refresher training opportunity to refer back to throughout the session. Now, one of the most critical elements of providing support is the provision of performance feedback. Performance feedback refers to a brief discussion on treatment fidelity and student outcomes. Performance feedback provided consistently or intermittently can improve implementation, which can have a resulting effect on improvements in student behavior. Two active ingredients to performance feedback include a behavior-specific praise statement with corrective feedback. In other words, something they did right and a comment or statement on a step they may have either omitted or incorrectly implemented. So during an initial or refresher training, this is provided immediately after that opportunity of rehearsal. When providing follow-up support, meaning support that happens outside that context of initial or refresher training, this could be sent as a statement via email. So I've provided an example on the screen and I'll read it aloud. Hi, Ms. Moreno. Great job increasing your behavior-specific praise statements and administering the reward right after the game. Remember to review the rules for the game and how each team will earn points at the start of each session. Keep trying to increase your behavior-specific praise statements throughout each interval of the game. You're doing an awesome job. Keep up the good work. And this is an example of performance feedback email provided during a teacher implemented group contingency. Now, let's take a look at Mr. Pump's treatment fidelity on the screen during the opportunity for rehearsal, which is an example of a performance feedback statement you could provide right after the rehearsal using the data to the left. Now, on this data, the plus indicates if the step was implemented correctly, and the minus indicates if the step was omitted or incorrect. So feel free to pause the screen and go through and try and develop your own performance feedback data or performance feedback statement based on the data that you observe on the right-hand side fidelity checklist. Now, in order to ensure we remain on the same page and are supporting other teachers' implementation, we should be providing ongoing support. This can include the informal check-ins that we mentioned earlier, having teachers take data on their own implementation and uploading it into a shared drive where you or a member of a student support team can review it and provide intermittent performance feedback via email. Now, why do we do this? I think that's an important question. Well, if we supplement training with some type of ongoing support, then we don't leave it to chance that our training was effective or not. Many of the things we learn don't often generalize to the settings they need to occur in because of the lack of inclusion of some type of ongoing support. So rather than training and hoping, let's train and plan to support other teacher implementers. If you think back to that prompt earlier on what does most PD typically look like, most of you might have said the lack of or inclusion of follow-up support is most likely something that could that's an issue with it. And having that ongoing and follow-up support may increase the effectiveness of that PD. Same logic stands here. So to bring all these separate points together, there are many obvious barriers when it comes to implementing student level supports. In regards to the first one you see here, I want to encourage you in this. An initial investment in time at the beginning can offset the time we spend on more intensive measures and supports. Of these points, though, I want to focus on the last one, acceptability and ability. Effective coordination hinges on staff being accepting and able. We can increase staff ability by providing high-quality training. That acceptability piece is at times harder to change, but one factor that can facilitate acceptability is evidence of behavior change. Think of it like this. If you start working out consistently and observe a change in your overall health, you may be more motivated to continue exercising versus if you observe no change. Applying this to students. If student behavior does continue to improve as a result of correct implementation, then hopefully that will push educators towards being more accepting of function-based supports. We can also encourage voice and choice. Providing opportunities for teacher input on the intervention design can lead to some tweaks on the malleable elements of a student-level support. This can help increase buy-in from the teacher, and together, these can lead to effective coordination to support student behavior. Thank you for watching this recording. Personal action item. What is one thing you will commit to doing to support other teacher implementers? Thank you for your time. If you would like to contact me or any of the Hub team members, those emails are included in the files that have also been sent to you and made accessible to you alongside this recording. Thank you very much.